The unopened letter slipped from the old family photo album and landed at my feet just as I was about to leave. I picked it up without thinking, but the moment her mother saw the faded envelope, every trace of color disappeared from her face. She whispered that she had prayed for years that nobody would ever find it, because inside was the truth that had quietly shaped every smile, every tear, and every sacrifice their family had carried in silence. In that single moment, an ordinary afternoon visit became the day that changed all of our lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can heal old wounds, forgiveness can free a heavy heart, hope can arrive when everything feels lost, and second chances are worth fighting for, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing emotional journeys that remind us we're never truly alone. I had known Meredith for nearly 12 years. We met during our first semester of college after accidentally reaching for the same notebook in the campus bookstore. She laughed first, handed it to me, and somehow that tiny moment became the beginning of an unbreakable friendship. She had the rare ability to make ordinary days feel lighter. When life became difficult, she never tried to solve every problem with perfect advice. She simply stayed beside the people she loved until they found the strength to keep moving. After graduation, our lives became busier. We found jobs in neighboring towns, spoke almost every day, and promised never to let adulthood steal the friendship that had carried us through our hardest years. Whenever either of us celebrated a promotion or endured heartbreak, the other always showed up with coffee, patience, and enough laughter to make tomorrow seem possible again. One warm Saturday afternoon, Meredith invited me to her family's farmhouse outside the city. Her mother, Eleanor, had spent weeks restoring the flower garden, and Meredith insisted I needed to see it before summer ended. The drive took less than an hour, winding through green fields, old fences, and rows of wildflowers dancing beneath a bright blue sky. Everything about the afternoon felt peaceful. Eleanor greeted me with the same warm smile I remembered from years before. She treated every guest as though they had been part of the family forever. Fresh lemonade sat on the kitchen table beside homemade bread, bowls of strawberries, and jars of honey collected from nearby hives. Sunlight streamed through every window, making the house glow with quiet comfort. The afternoon passed with easy conversations. We wandered through the garden, admired blooming roses, laughed over childhood stories Meredith had tried unsuccessfully to keep secret, and sorted old family keepsakes from dusty boxes stacked in the attic. Eleanor explained that she wanted to organize decades of memories before moving some things into storage. None of us imagined those forgotten boxes contained something far more important than old photographs. Hours slipped away unnoticed as golden sunlight poured through the attic windows. Dust floated lazily through the warm air while we carefully opened album after album. There were faded birthday pictures, school certificates, holiday cards, and tiny treasures collected over generations. Meredith teased her younger self for terrible hairstyles while Eleanor smiled with quiet nostalgia. Then the old envelope appeared. It had been tucked between two photographs, sealed but yellowed with age. My instinct was simply to hand it over, but Eleanor froze before taking it. Her hands trembled so noticeably that Meredith immediately asked if everything was all right. For several long seconds, Eleanor stared at the envelope without speaking. The cheerful atmosphere dissolved into complete silence. Finally, she admitted she had hidden that letter many years earlier because she believed opening it again would only reopen wounds that had finally begun to heal. Meredith gently encouraged her mother to tell the truth instead of carrying it alone. Eleanor slowly sat beside the window, took a deep breath, and began sharing a story neither of us had ever heard. More than 25 years earlier, shortly before Meredith was born, Eleanor's husband, Graham, had received an unexpected job offer overseas. They desperately needed the higher income because medical bills from Eleanor's complicated pregnancy had nearly destroyed their finances. Graham accepted the opportunity, promising it would only be temporary. Then tragedy struck. Communication became difficult. A shipping accident was reported overseas, and several workers were listed as missing. Months later, officials informed Eleanor that Graham had likely died. Without definitive answers, grief settled over the family like a permanent shadow. Heartbroken but determined, Eleanor raised Meredith alone. She worked multiple jobs, sacrificed every comfort, and never allowed her daughter to feel unwanted despite countless financial struggles. Whenever Meredith asked about her father, Eleanor simply explained that he had loved them deeply and had never chosen to leave. Years passed. Unknown to Eleanor, Graham had survived the accident but suffered severe injuries and memory loss. By the time fragments of his past returned, records had been misplaced, addresses had changed, and every attempt to locate his family reached dead ends. Believing Eleanor had rebuilt her life, he chose not to disrupt what he imagined was her peace. The letter resting in Eleanor's hands had arrived nearly 18 years earlier. It was Graham's final attempt. He explained everything inside those pages. He apologized for disappearing, described the accident, the years of recovery, and confessed he still loved his family more than anything else. He included his address and begged only for one chance to explain face to face. Eleanor admitted the letter had arrived during the hardest season of her life. She had finally begun recovering emotionally after years of believing herself widowed. Fear overwhelmed hope. She worried reopening the past would confuse Meredith, who had already learned to live without a father she barely remembered. Unable to decide what was right, she hid the letter, promising herself she would think about it later. Later quietly became years. Then decades. Tears rolled down Meredith's face, not because she hated her mother, but because she realized how loneliness and fear could trap even the strongest people into impossible choices. Eleanor had never acted out of cruelty. She had acted out of terror, convinced she was protecting everyone she loved. The three of us sat together in complete silence while sunlight continued pouring across the wooden floor. Finally, Meredith opened the envelope. Inside rested several carefully folded pages, one faded family photograph, and an address. No one knew whether Graham still lived there. No one even knew if he was still alive. Yet for the first time in decades, hope felt stronger than regret. Meredith looked toward her mother with gentle eyes instead of anger. She reminded Eleanor that every parent makes decisions believing they are protecting their children, even when those decisions later become painful. Carrying guilt for another 20 years would help no one. Eleanor broke down completely, admitting she had replayed that decision almost every day since hiding the letter. She often imagined opening it, writing back, or driving to the address herself. But each year made the silence harder to break until shame convinced her it was simply too late. Meredith quietly wrapped both arms around her mother. There was no dramatic accusation. No bitterness. Only forgiveness. I watched 2 generations heal wounds neither had fully understood until that afternoon. We decided there was only one meaningful thing left to do. While the afternoon sun still shone brightly, we drove to the address listed in the letter. The small white cottage remained standing, although the paint had faded and vines covered much of the porch. A kindly elderly neighbor noticed our hesitant expressions and walked over. When Eleanor softly spoke Graham's name, the neighbor smiled sadly. Graham had lived there for many years after returning home. He had become known throughout the neighborhood for repairing bicycles, helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, and planting flowers for anyone feeling lonely. He had never remarried. The neighbor explained that Graham passed away peacefully 2 years earlier. Our hearts sank. Then the neighbor added something unexpected. Until his final days, Graham believed miracles sometimes arrived late. Every birthday, every holiday, and every spring, he left a handwritten letter addressed to Eleanor and Meredith with instructions that they should be delivered if his family ever appeared. The neighbor disappeared inside her house and returned carrying a neatly tied bundle of envelopes. Each one was dated. Each one contained words written over many years. Meredith opened the first letter with trembling hands. Inside, Graham wrote that although life had stolen precious time, love had never left his heart. He hoped Meredith had grown into a kind woman who laughed often. He hoped Eleanor had forgiven herself for whatever burden she carried because he never blamed her. He believed both of them had simply done their best with impossible circumstances. Letter after letter carried encouragement instead of resentment. He celebrated birthdays he had missed. He imagined milestones he wished he could have witnessed. He thanked Eleanor for raising Meredith with strength and dignity. He asked Meredith to live without anger because anger always steals more years than it returns. By the final letter, tears flowed freely down every face. Graham wrote that if they were reading those words, then fate had finally reunited them in the only way still possible. He hoped they would not spend another day trapped inside old regrets. He wanted his family to remember him through kindness instead of sorrow. Eleanor pressed the letters against her heart. For the first time in decades, the guilt that had weighed upon her seemed just a little lighter. The drive back to the farmhouse felt different. No one spoke much. The silence no longer carried pain. It carried peace. Back at home, Eleanor carefully placed every letter into a new photo album rather than hiding them away. Meredith suggested creating a memory box filled not only with Graham's letters but also with stories, photographs, and happy moments so future generations would remember love instead of loss. Over the following months, I watched remarkable changes unfold. Eleanor began volunteering at the local community center, helping widows and families struggling through grief because she understood how isolating silent pain could become. Meredith organized neighborhood gatherings where people shared family stories, repaired broken friendships, and encouraged one another to reconnect before time slipped away. Their home slowly transformed from a place carrying hidden sorrow into one overflowing with laughter, fresh flowers, and open conversations. As for me, I realized that my simple afternoon visit had become one of life's greatest lessons. I had arrived as Meredith's best friend expecting nothing more than homemade lemonade and conversation. Instead, I witnessed forgiveness stronger than regret, love stronger than absence, and hope powerful enough to heal wounds that had remained hidden for decades. Sometimes families are not broken by a lack of love. Sometimes they are broken by fear, silence, and the mistaken belief that protecting someone requires carrying every burden alone. And sometimes healing begins not with grand miracles but with one forgotten letter, one honest conversation, and one courageous decision to forgive. Before we finish, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever forgiven someone after finally learning the full truth, or do you believe some regrets can only be healed through understanding? Please leave a meaningful comment sharing the lesson this story reminded you of. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May this story remind you that kindness is never wasted, forgiveness is never weakness, hope can survive even the longest silence, and sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves and those we love is the courage to open the letter we've been afraid to read.